The rain came down like a curtain of sorrow that night, heavy and unrelenting, blurring the world into streaks of silver and shadow. When a man who believed he had seen everything finally felt his heart stop, the millionaire's luxury car slowed as it turned toward the towering iron gates of his estate, headlights slicing through the storm. And that was when he saw them. Two fragile shapes lying motionless on the soaked pavement, clinging to each other as if the rain itself might steal them away. In that instant, something cracked inside a man who had spent his entire life building walls stronger than steel, and the silence in his chest roared louder than thunder. Before the story goes any further, take a moment to pause and breathe this in, because stories like this remind us of what truly matters. If you believe in kindness and second chances, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. If they believe in kindness, second chances. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that are still waiting to be touched. The man in the back seat was named Daniel Hargrove, a name known in boardrooms, magazines, and whispered conversations about power and money. He had risen from nothing, clawing his way up through grit, sacrifice, and a relentless drive that left little room for softness. The mansion he was returning to that night sat on a hill overlooking the city, a monument to success, surrounded by manicured lawns and guarded gates that kept the chaos of the world safely outside. Daniel had built his life on control, precision, and the belief that emotions were liabilities. Yet as the car rolled to a halt, rain hammering against the windshield, control slipped through his fingers like water. The elderly couple lay just beyond the gates, the man's thin arm wrapped protectively around the woman's shoulders. Their clothes were soaked through, clinging to frail bodies that seemed too light for the weight of the storm. The woman's gray hair was plastered to her face, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. The man's face was turned upward, rain running down the deep lines etched by decades of living, his expression frozen somewhere between exhaustion and quiet determination. They looked like they had been walking for hours, maybe days, until their strength simply gave out in the one place where warmth and shelter were visible but unreachable. Daniel's driver hesitated, unsure whether to proceed or call for security, but Daniel barely noticed. His mind had been thrown backward in time, dragged into a memory he rarely allowed himself to touch. He remembered being a boy standing in the rain outside a closed factory, his mother's hand trembling in his, her eyes hollow after another rejection. He remembered hunger, the ache of cold nights, and the feeling of being invisible to a world that hurried past without looking. He had sworn then that he would never be weak again, never need anyone's mercy. Somewhere along the way, he had kept that promise too well. The rain soaked through Daniel's expensive coat as he stepped out of the car, the cold biting into him like an accusation. Each step toward the couple felt heavier than the last, as if the ground itself resisted him. He knelt beside them, the world shrinking to the sound of rain and the sight of two lives hanging by a thread. Up close, they looked even smaller, more breakable, like time itself had worn them down to essentials. Their hands were intertwined, knuckles white, refusing to let go even in collapse. Daniel felt a tightness in his chest he had no name for, a mix of fear, guilt, and something dangerously close to compassion. He signaled urgently, and within moments the sterile efficiency of wealth sprang into motion. The gates opened, lights flared, and help arrived, but the image of that couple on the ground burned itself into Daniel's mind. As they were carried inside, rainwater dripping onto the marble floors of his home, the contrast felt almost cruel. The warmth, the chandeliers, the polished surfaces all seemed to mock the fragility that had just crossed the threshold. Daniel stood there soaked and shaking, realizing how thin the line was between comfort and despair. The couple was taken to a guest room, doctors summoned, blankets layered gently over their trembling bodies. Daniel paced the hallway, the echoes of his footsteps sounding too loud in the silence. He told himself he was doing the practical thing, the responsible thing, but deep down he knew something else was happening. This was not charity for him, it was a reckoning. As he waited, he wandered into a room he rarely used, one filled with old boxes he had never unpacked. Drawn by a restlessness he could not explain, he opened one and found photographs of his parents, their smiles wary but hopeful, taken before life had ground them down. Hours passed, the storm easing outside, replaced by a fragile quiet. The doctors emerged with careful reassurance that the couple would survive, though they were malnourished, exhausted, and in need of care. Relief washed over Daniel, followed swiftly by a wave of questions he could no longer ignore. Who were they? How had they ended up at his gates? And more unsettling still, how many others like them had he unknowingly driven past in his pursuit of success? As the night deepened, Daniel learned fragments of their story. The elderly man had once been a carpenter, proud of the homes he built with his hands. The woman had been a seamstress, stitching clothes late into the night to help make ends meet. They had lost their small apartment after medical bills piled up, one misfortune cascading into another until there was nothing left but each other. They had been walking toward the city, hoping to find shelter, when the storm overtook them. The mansion's lights had been a final beacon, a last gamble that someone inside might see them as human beings rather than obstacles. Daniel sat alone in his study, rainwater still drying on his skin, staring out at the city lights. For years, he had measured life in profits and losses, expansions and acquisitions. He had believed that once he reached the top, fulfillment would follow naturally. Instead, he found himself surrounded by luxury and haunted by emptiness. The elderly couple's presence in his home felt like a mirror held up to his soul, reflecting a version of himself he had tried to forget. He realized that success had not erased his past, it had simply buried it under layers of distraction. In the days that followed, Daniel made decisions that surprised even himself. He ensured the couple received ongoing medical care, not as a one-time gesture, but as a commitment. He arranged for them to have a small, comfortable home, free from the constant fear of eviction or hunger. But more than that, he spent time with them, sitting quietly, listening to their stories, absorbing the simple dignity with which they spoke about love, loss, and perseverance. Their gratitude was not loud or dramatic, it was steady and profound, expressed in small smiles and gentle nods that carried the weight of entire lifetimes. Through them, Daniel began to see the world differently. He noticed the people he had once overlooked. The janitor who worked late into the night, the assistant who always stayed after hours, the security guard who knew everyone's name. He started asking questions, really listening to the answers. His company's policies shifted, slowly but meaningfully, toward fairness and compassion. Programs were created to help employees facing hardship, not as publicity stunts but as genuine lifelines. For the first time, Daniel felt the strange, unfamiliar warmth of purpose that had nothing to do with profit. The mansion, once a symbol of isolation, began to feel like a place of connection. Laughter echoed in rooms that had known only silence. The elderly couple, regaining strength, tended a small garden on the grounds, their hands finding peace in the soil. Daniel often watched from a distance, struck by how something so simple could bring such visible joy. He understood then that kindness was not a weakness, as he had once believed, but a force capable of rebuilding what life had broken. Months later, on a clear morning after a night of rain, Daniel stood at the same gates where everything had changed. The pavement was dry, the air fresh, the city stretching out below like a promise. He thought about the man he had been before that storm, the one who would have driven past without slowing down. That version of himself felt like a stranger now. He knew he could never undo the years he had spent closed off from the world's pain, but he could choose what came next. If this story has touched something deep inside you, if it has reminded you of the power of seeing and being seen, please take a moment to engage with this video. Your likes, shares, and comments help stories of hope travel further than we ever could alone. Just before we reach the end, here is a special request from the heart. Please comment below and share what this story made you feel or who it reminded you of. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. As Daniel walked back toward his home, he carried with him a quiet understanding that wealth could buy comfort, but not meaning, that success without compassion was an empty victory. The rain that night had washed away more than just dirt from the streets. It had stripped away his illusions and left behind something raw and real. And somewhere beyond the gates, in a world still full of storms, 2 lives had been saved not just by money, but by a moment of humanity that proved even the hardest hearts can change when they choose to stop, look, and care.